In the 14th century, Bohemia was in disarray, weakened by internal strife. 2 popes were appointed to govern the largest church, leading to a division that only King Vance hoped to resolve. On his way to meet Lord Boris, the king sought to restore unity between the rival factions. Meanwhile, a warrior named Jan Žižka observed the chaos from a hill as soldiers ambushed Boris. However, Boris remained unfazed, slaying his attackers with ease. Jan's archers unleashed a volley of arrows from the distance before joining the fray, driving most of the enemy into a river, where they were mercilessly finished off. Though victorious, Jan was wounded in the clash. After the battle, Jan confronted Boris over unpaid dues, angering Jan's men. They captured a prisoner who revealed that Henry Rosenberg had ordered Boris's assassination. Meanwhile, Henry, a powerful figure with vast control over the kingdom, and King Vance's brother, Siggy, conspired to eliminate Boris. Siggy opposed the kingdom's allegiance to the 2 popes, aligning himself with Henry. Henry warned the king to avoid involvement with the church, while Boris surprised both by delivering a message to Vance, leaving Henry seething. Boris and Henry exited the royal court, arguing about unpaid debts that gave Henry control over Vance's decisions. Boris later met Catherine, Henry's future wife, and left with her, stirring further intrigue. Jan, now outside the kingdom, encountered Lord Torak, an old ally turned ruthless enforcer for Henry and Siggy. Though they once fought side by side, Torak now mistreated the people under Henry's influence, admitting that money was his only loyalty. Boris approached Jan, suggesting they kidnap Catherine to pressure Henry, but Jan initially refused, finding the idea dishonorable. Boris argued that it could save the country and bring Jan wealth, leaving the warrior torn. That night, Jan visited his brother Jaro, meeting his nephew Tom. Jaro told Tom stories of Jan's heroic deeds, and the villagers came to pay their respects. They reminisced about their father's bravery, recalling the king's gift of a knife in his honor. Tom vowed to become a great warrior like his uncle. Before leaving, Jan gave Jaro money to care for the villagers, as Jaro acknowledged Jan's deep admiration for their late father. The next day, Henry accompanied Catherine to church, despite his skepticism toward religion. While she prayed, a man approached Catherine, leading her to meet a supposed priest. Instead, she found Jan waiting, and his men knocked her unconscious. They transported her in a cart filled with wounded people. When Catherine awoke, furious at her capture, Jan's group, atheists who scoffed at religious beliefs, dismissed her anger. As they traveled, they passed through villages devastated by Henry's oppression, with Jan explaining that Henry slaughtered anyone who defied him. Catherine grew increasingly disillusioned by the suffering around her. Back in the kingdom, Henry learned that his soldiers had returned without Catherine and flew into a rage. Meanwhile, Lord Boris discussed their plot with King Vance, who was willing to pay handsomely for its success. Hiding in a cave with Catherine, Jan discovered her true identity as the daughter of a powerful lord. She lashed out at him for his deceit, but Jan remained resolute. Torak was dispatched to find Catherine, and Jaro returned to his village, only to discover Torak teaching Tom how to fight. When Jaro confronted him, Torak brutally killed both Jaro and Tom. Grief-stricken, Jan returned to the village to find it abandoned, with Tom's lifeless body outside. Furious, he buried his nephew and vowed to abandon the pursuit of wealth, instead pledging to fight for his people. Jan rallied the villagers, and together they trained for the battles ahead. They hid weapons in preparation, knowing they couldn't trust Torak. When Torak and his soldiers advanced, Jan and his allies launched a surprise attack from the forest, forcing a confrontation. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Jan and his people fought fiercely, using smoke and guerrilla tactics to disorient the enemy. In the ensuing chaos, Catherine was recaptured by soldiers. Jan pursued them through hidden caves, engaging Torak's men in brutal combat. Though injured, Jan continued the fight, driven by his determination to protect Catherine and his people. When Catherine tended to Jan's wounds, he revealed painful memories of a lost love named Anna, killed long ago by the king's men. Catherine offered comfort, and their bond deepened. Despite their efforts to evade capture, hunters found them and brought Catherine back to the soldiers. Jan's group pursued them into the kingdom, where they encountered Torak and his forces. A fierce battle erupted, with Jan unleashing the king's lion, which tore through the soldiers, giving Jan the chance to rescue Catherine. As they escaped through a secret route, Torak pursued them relentlessly. In a final confrontation atop a fort, Catherine leaped into the river to prevent Torak from gaining control over her. Jan followed, engaging Torak in a desperate struggle underwater. Using a stone, Jan killed Torak and carried Catherine to safety on the opposite shore. Although Catherine was injured, she survived, and the two shared a brief moment of peace. Catherine confessed her love to Jan, giving him her ring as a token of her feelings. Tragically, she succumbed to her injuries, leaving Jan heartbroken. After Catherine's death, Jan returned to his people, her ring hanging around his neck as a symbol of their bond.